All right, welcome everyone to the February WCMC meeting. My name is Emily Adrid and I'm with CWCB. If you all could put I know some of you have already been doing that, so thank you. If you could put your name and affiliation in the chat, that would be great. And we're gonna do something a little bit different this time. Instead of doing our updates and discussions from water providers and managers at the end, I'm going to ask those who would share at the end to just put an update in the chat. So gonna just switch it up a little bit. So yeah, updates in the chat if you could please. Thank you. And then I will stop sharing my screen. And Brian, I know you are up first today, so I believe I made you co-host, so go ahead and share your screen.
Yes, good morning, Emily. Thank you.
Yeah.
Sorry, I always have trouble figuring out how to get that unmute button to work. Okay, let me share my thanks. Let me share my screen and get started here. Sorry, trying to get the screens correct. All right, let me know if this does not show the entire presentation. Is that showing the presenter view or the main slide?
Sorry, I was on mute. I'm not seeing anything at the moment. I don't know if anybody else is seeing anything. Oh, there we
go. Let me try one more time here.
Okay, I'm looking at your slides now.
Is that the presenter view or is it the main?
Yeah, presenter view.
Let me try to get it right. I need to maximize size on this presentation here. Sorry. For some reason, it's not just letting me share a screen. It'll only let me share apps. Well, if I have to, I'll roll with that. But let me see if I can't get it to work here.
Okay. I also made you host. So maybe that will.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Let's try this. Is it there still showing the presenter view?
Nope. I just see the slide.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, Emily. And thank you all for your patience. Sorry about that. I'm going to go ahead and get started. I got another meeting to jump on here at about 9 o'clock. I can be a little late. Won't hurt too much, but it would be good for me to be on that meeting. So thank you for allowing me to switch things around, me to go first. Thank you all. Okay, I'm going to get started here. I am switching up the format a little bit today in an effort, one, to try and save a little bit of time, and two, to maybe do a little bit more of a kind of concerted or maybe focused presentation on some of the bigger highlights of what's going on around the state. I know usually we go through the exact same slides for all 7 basins in the state, and I feel like that is maybe a bit monotonous and doesn't maybe really highlight the bigger points here. So if you have any suggestions or input for future presentations, do not hesitate to reach out to me. Email's down there at the bottom. I'm happy to take suggestions on how the presentation should look in the future. So just starting off, looking at how snowpack has progressed over the course of this year. So as you can see, as always, the black line is this year. And here we are. Here I selected 2 years for most of these graphics that are very similar to where we are at this point, just to kind of provide a little bit of a reference. If you remember back to, in this case, 2007 and 2004, that's where we're closest at this point, is to those 2 years and where they were at this point. Which is at this point relatively close to normal. We're at 96% of normal for statewide snowpack across Colorado. We've made some pretty good gains since being in the 10th percentile back in early January, and then we had a solid storm set there for about a week and a half, 2 weeks in January, and then here over the last 2-3 weeks, we've received some pretty good storms in the mountains that have provided a much needed boost in terms of snowpack. One thing I'd like to continue to highlight, as I just did, is it is relatively normal to see, these increases of 2 weeks where you see what one might consider to be considerable snow accumulation, and then get a little bit of pause, and then have another considerable, period of accumulation, and then pause again. I'm going to highlight these here in just a little bit, what we've seen over those periods, and what that means, and what that has meant for us in terms of water supply. It is relatively normal to see these dry periods and then, wet periods. I shouldn't say relatively normal. That is normal. That is the norm. It's very rare for us to, see periods of dry, very little snow, and it's very rare to see constant snow. So it's more typical to see spouts of a ½ inch of snow water equivalent accumulation, 4/10 of an inch, and then it'll dry out where you won't get much at all accumulation for a little bit. So just wanted to highlight how normal this is and what exactly this means. Forgive me 1 second while I clear my throat. Thank you. Sorry. Okay, so last month I highlighted where we were at the beginning of January. On January 6th here, you can see snowpack was pretty low, 70% of normal in the northern and central basins, and 50 to 60% of normal in the southern basins. And then breaking that down a little bit into some of the sub basins, you can see there were some areas of particular dryness, in the Sagre de Cristos, the northern Sangres, and then other portions of the state were looking well below normal. But we moved into last month. This is the slide from last month's presentation. And as I pointed out, January provided a much needed boost there. Mainly the boost was seen in the northern half of the state. There was also a pretty good accumulation in the southern half of the state. It just wasn't quite as significant as it was in the northern half, but still definitely filled up the cup a good bit more. And then here again, looking at some of the sub basins within the 7 major basins, you can see really the story was much the same, dry in the southern half and much better in the northern half. And then this is as of February the 18th, when I updated this slide this weekend. There's been a considerable improvement in the southern half of the state now, really bringing it's kind of amazing how it's brought the northern half of the state and the southern half of the state almost entirely in line with one another. To be within 10% across the entire state is somewhat rare, I would say, for at least the last decade. But it's great to see that the state is pretty consistent at this point, as when I updated it 2 days ago. And then again, breaking it down by some of the more sub basins, you can see that there are a few basins that are still below what I call below normal. 90% or below is slightly below normal, and there's just a few of them out there, not very many, which is a good sign. So we're doing a good bit better after February's accumulation. So here is where I'm going to highlight some of the different ends of the spectrum for all of the parameters. In this case, this is going to be for snow water equivalent. The Gunnison, as you saw from the previous slide, is one of the best basins for snowpack in the state. It is right at 100%. Again, this is actually as of yesterday. It took me 2 days over the weekend to update the presentation in order to provide you the most up-to-date information. So the Gunnison is 100% of median, thanks to some of the storms that we've seen since early January. You can see that early January storm, as we pointed out last month, really provided a great boost, being near about 10% of median and then going up to about 100% of median in just a few short weeks. Pretty close, not quite 100% then, but now it is. And then looking at the flip side of the spectrum, which, as I pointed out earlier, is not too far down. It's the flip side is not too far away. Fortunately, it's only 88% in the Rio Grande headwaters as of yesterday morning. I know the other graphic, the maps said 90%. There's a few slight differences in the calculation approach for the two products, but they're nonetheless quite close and indicate that snowpack is not as bad as it was earlier this year in the upper Rio Grande, but much better at 88% of normal. So here is, we're moving on to precipitation. This is the water year to date accumulated precipitation. And I'll point out really quickly the difference between precipitation and snow water equivalent. Precipitation is collected in a storage gauge that collects all forms of precipitation. Snowpack is quite literally that. Snowpack or snow water equivalent is the in situ weight of the water in the snow on top of the sensor. So if a windstorm comes along and scours or blows all that snow off of the pillow, or the pillow is the snow water equivalent sensor, it will decrease that amount of water. Conversely, if we get a windstorm that redistributes and adds snow to the pillow more than what the actual storm accumulated, which happens frequently, that would drive that number higher. And so that could be one of the reasons. There's many other reasons that the difference between water year-to-date precipitation and snow water equivalent vary. Is for a number of reasons, but that's one of the reasons why we see a difference here. So statewide year-to-date precipitation is 94% of normal, which is actually relatively close to the 96% of normal that we're seeing for statewide snowpack. And here there is a little bit of differences from the snow water equivalent map. You can see that there's a few basins that are slightly below normal, the South Platte, the Upper Rio Grande, and the combined San Miguel, Dolores, Animas, San Juans, whereas most of the other basins are near about 100% with the exception of the combined Laramie North Platte. So in general, we're really doing quite good compared to where we were just 2-3 months ago. Looking at precipitation a slightly different way here on the time series graph. Here we are again with current year-to-date precipitation, and here's some of those similar lines, similar traces from 2004, 2007, and 2010. And again, the slightly different methods of calculation show 95% of median year-to-date precipitation. Okay, so here I wanted to break down a number of those storms that I was pointing out earlier in the snowpack accumulation graph. Now here we are looking at precipitation. It is a little bit easier to show via precipitation and compare some of those numbers, but largely it's much the same as snowpack. And nearly every drop, or I should say every particle of precipitation that we receive right now in the mountains is snow. So we can almost consider them synonymous in terms of total accumulation. So most recently, from February 17th, when I created this graphic, to February 1st, we have received 145% of normal precipitation. Going back a little bit further from yesterday morning through the last time I presented in late January, we've seen 103% of normal precipitation. And again, what I'm doing is I'm highlighting both the periods of increased or above normal precipitation, and then interacted or plotted together with the period of dry, which again is completely normal to see a dry period and then a wet period, dry period and wet period. So when we put those two most recent periods together, we get 103% of normal precipitation. And then looking back to the beginning of January, where we got that what I would argue is a slightly bigger storm there in January. We're at 135% of normal precipitation from January 5th, early January through now. And then going back a little bit further to December 21st, precipitation has been 115% of normal. And then from January 5th through January 19th, just showing here again that the period in January was the most significant period of precipitation that we've had, was 213% of normal. So that's why we see some of those slightly larger numbers over the longer time frame, going back to December and or early January. It's because that January time period really provided a great boost, particularly to the northern half of the state, unfortunately not to the southern half of the state. So highlighting some of the precipitation around the two basins on the ends of the spectrum. The Arkansas River Basin is now at 104% of normal precip, so it's just slightly above normal. And into the San Miguel, Dolores, San Juan basins, precipitation year to date is 85% of normal, and most closely compares to 2020, 2022, 2014, and 2003. Just another way to look at precipitation and what it's meant is these stacked graphs, right? So as of yesterday morning, precipitation through February was 2.9 inches of precipitation across the entire state on average. And then the median is typically 3.2 for the month. So again, we're doing pretty good. Let's see. So since January 22nd, actually, I should check these numbers. I don't remember if I updated this date here, but we had 145% of normal percent of median precipitation. I think that's actually supposed to be through the first of the month, forgive me. So 145% of median precipitation from February 1 through yesterday. Oh, excuse me. Oh, and then 91% through the end of February. Forgive me, I'm trying to remember what I did here. So we've had 91% of the median total for the entirety of February, but 145% of normal through this point in February. So this should be 2-1, forgive me. And then last year we had 3 inches of precipitation through the entire month of February. So a very long-winded way of saying we're doing quite good for precipitation at this point through the month. Okay, moving on into reservoirs. Again, statewide precipitation is statewide reservoir numbers are 100% of median, as they have been last month and back in November. That's what we reported. So across the state, reservoirs have stayed relatively steady in their management of the water. So it's actually going back into the years past when I gave this presentation, it was pretty rare to see 100% of median reservoirs through much of the winter, but it is something that we've been maintaining this year, and I think quite closely last year. So it's really good to see. Oh, I'm sorry, that was November 1, forgive me. This was, and I forgot to update the text here on the left, but here's my check here. February 1 reservoir numbers again are 100%. So dates are not quite updated, forgive me, but the data is fortunately the same, largely. And then looking at the longer term plot for the state of Colorado, here you can kind of see that we're right along the median line, 100% of median. And you can see, as I mentioned before, it has been rarely the case where we kind of track along the median line during the winter and for so long. But it's good to have reservoirs right near normal. Another way of looking at reservoirs across the state, the aqua line is this year, 2024, and last year is the green line. You can see that reservoirs are up considerably this year as compared to last year at this time. Excuse me, I had to clear my throat again. So again, going to highlight some of the basins in the state that are on the opposite end of the spectrum. The upper Rio Grande with the yellow line here is above normal, coming down from late last year, but still above normal for reservoir storage, combined reservoir storage. And then I highlighted or decided to choose a few of the larger reservoirs in the basin to show how they're impacting the overall number. And then the San Miguel, Dolores, Animas, San Juan Basin is the lowest in the state. And we can get that number from the previous map slide. You can see that the blue line is the combined San Miguel, Dolores, Animas, San Juan basins, largely driven by Navajo Reservoir. No surprise, as it's one of the largest reservoirs in the state, is tracking below normal. Okay, this is stream flows, observed stream flows from October 1 to October 31st. And the reason I put this in there is because it's always a good indicator of what soils were like, how thirsty they are, and where stream flows were leading into winter. It'll have the biggest implications in spring when the snow starts to melt, wets those soils up, and then we get a real idea of how efficient or productive the runoff is. So in large part, these basins being relatively dry, particularly the ones in the south, will be a bit hungry or thirsty for that runoff in the beginning, and will make the snowpack runoff a little less efficient. So it'll eat up some of that runoff that's occurring in the snowpack, and will theoretically make it such that the runoff is not quite as efficient. And that is reflected in, or these stream flows are reflected in the stream flow forecasts largely. So you will see the effects of some of that in the stream flow forecast here coming up. So here's the stream flow forecast as of February 1, 2024. Now remember the snow accumulations that we saw through January, which impacted the February 1 forecast. The snow that we saw then was relatively below normal in the southern half of the state, right? So I highlighted how impactful the snow accumulation was for the statewide total number, and that was mainly focused on the northern half of the state, but the southern half of the state did not really see those accumulations. And so reflected in the stream flow forecast generated on February 1st, you see a lot of the reds and yellows in the southern half of the state. Fortunately, the accumulations that we've seen over the course of February have been more focused on the southern half of the state, and we should see some improvement to those stream flow forecasts come March 1 here. So we have yet to see how much more snow we get here in the next 9 days before the end of the month. But I do think that the accumulations that we saw will have an impact and drive those forecasts up a bit. So looking at some of the more extreme quote unquote forecast, looking at the San Miguel, Dolores, Animas, San Juan from the February 1 timeframe, you can see here's the median line. Most of those probabilistic or 50% exceedance forecast are below, or all of them are below that median line. So, and then looking at the upper Rio Grande as well, where conditions, snowpack conditions were below normal, you could see that all of those forecasts were for below normal runoff. But again, hopefully with the accumulations that we saw here in earlier February, we will see an improvement to these, and I would guess that we will. Moving north a little bit more into the Gunnison, some of the forecasts are a bit better. Still not great. We'd like to see more snow and the forecast be shifted a good bit more to closer to the median or above, but that's not where things are for the Gunnison. And then looking at the Yampa White Little Snake as of February 1, forecasts were a bit better, but still below normal, mainly because of the dry conditions that we've been seeing, both leading into the winter. The soils are still going to be a little bit thirsty, as are the base flows for the streams, but we were also slightly below normal snowpack there as well as of February 1. So in summary, snowpack is 96% of median as of yesterday. The lowest basin in the state is the Rio Grande at 90% or 88, depending on which graphic you're looking at, which tool you're looking at. The highest in the state are the Gunnison and the combined Yampa White North Platte, which are both at 100%, right at 100% of median. We saw a 4% increase in snowpack from last month. So last month we were 92% of normal statewide, and now we're 96% of normal statewide. And those early January and February storms really provided that boost that we need, or we provided a boost. We need still more, a bit more precipitation to really get us where we want to be. I'd say we need to be about 120% of normal snowpack to get some of those stream flow forecast at about 100% of normal runoff, just because of some of those dry soils and antecedent stream flows. In a normal year at this point, we are about 75% of the way through our accumulation season. So we still have about 25% of our snow accumulation season to go. It usually ends, depending on where you are in the state, early to late April. Of course, things can go kind of late. We can have a late winter, or it can end early too, right? I can't remember exactly what the outlook is for right now, but it can go either way. So just to kind of give you an idea of what we're looking out for. Reservoir storage, fortunately, is 100% of median. Good spot to be. A little bit of variability across the different basins, but you saw that in the previous slides. And then precipitation is only 94% of median and ranges from about 85% of normal to about 105 in the Arkansas. So that is all that I have. I actually do have a few minutes for questions, if you have time, Emily, for that.
Thanks so much, Brian. Yes, we do have time. If anybody has questions for him. All right, well, hearing none, thank you so much, Brian. And thanks for, hopping on this meeting before your next one. We appreciate that.
Absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, if there are any questions, don't hesitate to email me. But I'm going to hop off here and join my other meeting. We'll talk to you all next month.
Thanks, Brian.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. So next I see Becky, you're on the call. Feel free to share your screen.
Okay. Let's see. How's that look?
Great, thank you.
All righty. Thanks everyone for joining. It's a bit different going after the snowpack, so this will be fun, but I'm going to transition into what's been happening with snow and the stream flow forecast to kind of what's happening with temperature and precipitation and look at a spring outlook. So we're going to start with a little bit of a water year to date look at the temperature and precipitation. Starting with precipitation, this is looking at the precipitation rank around the state for the full 4 months of October through January. So the percentiles are for that 129-year record in the NOAA data set. And where you see white are areas that are in that near normal range. And then as we get into the greens, we're ranked wetter, and the browns were ranked drier. So we have a lot of white over the northern and central mountains into portions of the plains and around the Palmer Divide. We've got some drier areas showing up over the metro area in the northern Front Range. A lot of dryness over the southwest portion of the state into the San Luis Valley and portions of the Arkansas Valley. But down there in the southeast corner, we've got that wetter ranking popping up. So once you put all that together, this water year to date so far has ranked 33rd driest out of that 129-year record. Breaking it down month by month, this is what we saw for January, the map on the left. So you can see down there in Los Animas and Baca counties, we had a very wet January. That's not necessarily a really big deal because they don't get a lot of precipitation in January. So when you only get about, you know, a quarter to a third of an inch, it can look really wet when you get 2/3 of an inch or close to an inch. So, but we did see that activity down there. And a little bit as you start to head into the higher elevations along I-70 in the Central Mountains on a couple of dry spots, but overall about middle of the road. So the table on the right shows the rankings for each month of the water year. October, December, January have been, right hovering near average. And then November was ranked below average at 22nd driest, which is kind of what brings down that October through January time period a little bit. So that's where we are on the precipitation side of things. Shifting over to temperature, this map is for the 4 months, October through January, of temperature ranks. If you saw any blue, that would be colder rank, but no areas have had a colder rank for that 4-month time period, with the exception of a couple areas that are in that near normal category. Most of the state has ranked in the top 35 warmest years. As you get to the darker colors, that darkest red is top 10 warmest out of 129 years for significant areas of the state. So when you combine all that for the entire state, we have started the water year ranked 10th warmest. Here's the breakdown month by month. January was a lot closer to average than earlier in the water year. So January ranked 57th warmest in that near average range. You can see where there was the wetter area in Southeast Colorado also ended up cooler. And then pretty much all of the West Slope and the San Luis Valley and into the Gunnison area, we were looking at above average temperatures. But most of the state was a little bit more regulated, and a lot of that was just due to that extreme cold snap that happened in the middle of the month. Without that extreme cold snap, we would probably see that January would have been another above average month for temperature. December was our warmest month, ranked 7th warmest, and in that much above average category. But you can see that also October and November ranked above average. All right, so I'm going to shift and talk about current conditions, kind of where we've been through the month of February and other indicators like evaporative demand and soil moisture. So this is the temperature anomalies that we've seen for the last 30 days. So this was after the January cold snap in the middle of January. So this is not just month to date, but going back to the 19th of January through the 17th of February, we've had above average temperatures. So that darkest red color here is 4 degrees above that 1991 to 2020 average. So very warm over the last 30 days. Interestingly enough, though, we've also had a lot of precipitation, particularly in February. We've gotten anywhere from around an inch and a half on the plains to closer to 2 to 3 inches, 4 to 5 in the highest elevations since the beginning of February. Brian really touched on this well with the activity that's happened in the snowpack and the highest elevations for the month of February, but we've had that activity pretty much all over and in the lower elevations too. So when you take this map and you make it a % of average for month to date, you get this. And that's also a testament to how dry February normally is for the Eastern Plains. Going back You can see the precipitation on the eastern plains, ranging anywhere from, we've got 3/4 of an inch in the southeast part of the state, going up towards I-70 on the plains to about 1 1/4 inch, and around an inch here or there, and that is equal to 200% or more of average for the eastern plains. Northwest Colorado, lower elevations there, it's also been well above average. It's well above average for February for the lower elevation San Luis Valley and for areas around the Four Corners. We do see a couple of drier patches as we get into those higher elevations, though, where we start to see it's either closer to average in that white color or just a little bit below average, 70 to 90% of average, where we see those light brown shadings. So this is a look at soil moisture as of February 16th. The caveat is we might not be seeing the changes in soil moisture where the soils stay frozen all the time. But if you look along the Front Range and Eastern Plains, we have had some improvements to the shallow soil moisture with the activity and precipitation that we've seen. So the areas with the blue on the left side are shallow, wetter, shallow soils. On the right, that's a deeper column of soil moisture. And so you can still see some drier areas popping up, particularly as you look over the Yampa Valley in Northwest Colorado, areas of the plains, and areas that might come off of the Sangre de Cristos. But overall, this is not too bad of a picture. So shifting over to, that's from the surface and what the water's doing in the surface to what is the water doing in the atmosphere. And evaporative demand is how much moisture the atmosphere wants to take out of the surface. This is not something that we normally consider in the winter, but I like to show it because it gives you an indication of what's going on with the different indicators. The different indicators that go into this include temperature, relative humidity, solar radiation, and wind. So we know over the past month, the temperature, this is going to include those colder temperatures, but even more recently with warmer temperatures, we haven't seen high evaporative demand from warmer temperatures, which means we have had a little bit more moisture in the air and possibly less wind than what we would normally see this time of year, so that we're not in one of those high evaporative demand categories over any of the state. And depending on what time period you pick, a couple of sections pop up with a little bit of yellow, but not really much. And so that really means that we are not kind of testing our dormant vegetation with any harsh conditions right now. So I'm going to go through a few maps and looking at the standardized precipitation index. So what this is it's just taking precipitation and turning it into an index of how abnormally wet or how abnormally dry is that time period at these stations. So if you've got the greens and blues and purples, that would be abnormally wet compared to that time period. So in this case, we're looking at 30-day SPIs. So if we compared all of those January 20th through February 18th time periods, the areas that show greens and blues and purples are much wetter than they normally are during this time of year. And so pretty much all along the Front Range into southern Colorado on the eastern plains, the last 30 days are ranked much wetter than they normally are this time of year. As we get into the higher elevations and you start to see those gray dots, that's in that kind of near normal range. And then we don't have a lot of them here, but these are our drought categories. So a yellow, kind of what we see around the Grand Junction area, would be starting in that D0 category. And that's the only dry one we see on the 30-day time period. As we shift to the 120-day time period, this takes us back to mid-October. So going back mid-October to mid-February, we have a whole lot of gray dots, which means based on everything that's happened since then, it's kind of amounted out to be near normal for a lot of areas of the state. We do have some drier patches as you look in the Colorado main stem areas. We've got some of these dry patches popping up in the northern mountains, a couple of dry patches. And then we've got our wet patches here in the northern Front Range and other parts of the northern mountains. But nothing too dry really popping up on that 120-day time period. Extending into the 9-month is where you really start to see the differences from one side of the Continental Divide to the other. So this takes us back to middle of May. And based on the very dry summer that we had over Western Colorado and Southern Colorado, and a lack of monsoon season late in the summer, that's where you really start to see some of those very dry conditions popping up in Western Colorado. A couple of D4 level SPIs around Grand Junction. As you go into the San Juan Mountains and the Gunnison Valley, we've got really dry SPIs. And we've had quite a bit of very dry conditions in the San Luis Valley for a while too. This also has the memory of the extremely wet May and June that we had along the northern Front Range and onto the Eastern Plains. So you can see for 9 months, this is a very wet 9 months that's mostly driven by May and June showing up in the SPIs throughout Eastern Colorado. So that takes us into kind of what's the drought situation. I always like to start with a look at the entire contiguous United States and where do we stand compared to the rest of the states. So you can see that New Mexico still has some pretty bad pockets of drought. And Iowa is another area that sticks out with really bad drought. And Colorado, has a little bit, but not too much when looking at some of the other states. So zooming in on Colorado, we can see that we have pretty much no drought on the Front Range and Eastern Plains. As we start to get to the mountains east of the divide, we're starting to see some of those D0s, which is abnormally dry, and D1 in the Sangre de Cristos. In the northern mountains as we get to close to North Park. And as we cross over the divide, we start to see D0 and D1 pockets as well. And then basically remnants from the late summer and fall extremely dry period in the San Luis Valley. We still have D2 in the San Luis Valley and pockets of the higher elevations around there. So looking at the table, we can see that just over 11% of the state is in a drought category, which would be the D1s and D2s that you see. And 63% of our state is not in any dry category at all. That's a little bit different from what it was the last time we had this meeting. So this is looking at the changes that have occurred over the drought monitor for the last 4 weeks. So this is comparing what did the January 16th drought monitor map look like to the one that was released last week. And so everywhere where there's green, there's been improvements made to the drought monitor. So obviously that 200% of average precipitation on the Eastern Plains has helped improve drought conditions. And so you see that one category of improvement along a lot of the plains, and in Weld County, it was a 2-category improvement where we had some D1 there. So no longer any drought categories in Northeast or Eastern Colorado. The Northern Mountains have seen some improvement, and a lot of Southwest Colorado and the San Juan Mountains, the San Luis Valley, and down into the Southern Mountains have seen improvements over the last 4 weeks, thanks to the a lot of activity that we've seen, particularly in February. So now we're going to go into what is coming down the line for us and getting out the crystal ball. Start shortest term, and this is what the outlook is for the next 7 days in terms of precipitation. So on the left is the precipitation accumulations that are expected starting this Tuesday morning and going through to next Tuesday morning. What is the total amount of precipitation accumulation that we can expect? You can see that there is continued activity expected for the higher elevations. The northern mountains look to get in some areas 1.5 to 2 inches of precipitation. The San Juan Mountains a little bit closer to 3/4 to 1.5 inches of precipitation. And then as we get into the lower elevations in western Colorado, that moves down to about 1/4 to 1/2 an inch. And then moving east of the divide, we're looking at dry in southeast Colorado and very light accumulations in northeast Colorado. The map on the right shows how those accumulations compare to what we typically want to see to keep up with average for this time of year. So northwest Colorado, this is going to be a nice wet addition for some of the higher elevations and the lower elevations. Even getting down into the Grand Mesa area and along the I-70 corridor. Portions of the San Juan Mountains, this will probably help them keep going near average, but even with the precipitation and snow that they get, it might be a little bit less than what they have, so they might actually fall behind a little bit more based on what they should normally get in a typical week. Along the Front Range Mountains going east of the divide and into the plains, it's a little bit of a drier week, but that's not typically a really big deal this time of year, so it's just slightly drier than average. It's just a little bit more drier than average when you get to the mountainous areas. The 8 to 14 day outlook from the Climate Prediction Center focuses in on the period of February 27th through March 4th. So on the left, we have the temperature outlook. Areas in blue are showing where it is more likely to be below average temperatures for that time period. And areas in red are more likely to be above average temperatures. And so you can see basically from Colorado and going east, we're in a pretty large ridge of warm temperatures, and that gets more confident as you go east of our state. But that does indicate that particularly the east side of our state is going to continue to experience some of those mild conditions, especially in line with what we're currently experiencing now. As we go to the west slope, it's more likely that it's just going to be seasonal and near average temperatures of what we expect at the end of February, beginning of March. On the right side is the precipitation outlook. So the greens are areas that are leaning towards being above average precipitation, and the brown are leaning towards areas that will more likely be below average precipitation. Southern Colorado is in the gray, which means it's more likely that it's going to be near average precipitation, which means we should expect some precipitation activity in the higher elevations and possibly drier in southeast Colorado. For the northern part of the state, there's a very slight leaning to above average precipitation, but it's really very slight. So meaning we should expect near normal precipitation. That should mean mountain activity with snow, maybe drier on the lower elevations. Incidentally, I'll add that this precipitation pattern is pretty typical of what we would expect for a La Nina, not an El Nino, which we are currently in. So just one example of how we have not really been following the El Nino pattern for much of this winter. And this is why we can say it's never a perfect relationship, whether it's El Nino or La Nina. The seasonal outlook follows a little bit more with an El Nino, but not totally. But we're looking at the March, April, May time period. So what is our spring outlook telling us? Again, on the left, we've got the temperature. Areas in red are leaning to more likely above average temperatures, which we would expect for the Pacific Northwest to be warmer during an El Nino. For Colorado, anyone's guess. They don't really have any indication of what type of temperature trends that we're going to see. And I think that's because we've had in our variability in our past springs has been very high. We have a lot of uncertainty with temperature. You know, we've got this overall warming trend of things, you know, generally becoming warmer, but we're not seeing that as much in the spring as of late. And so I think that lends itself to the uncertainty of, you know, what are we going to see in terms of temperature? Precipitation outlook on the right, the browns are areas that indicate more likely below average precipitation, and the greens indicate more likely above average precipitation. We would expect the Gulf Coast states and Florida to be above average in an El Nino situation, but we would also expect above average precipitation in the Southwest for an El Nino, and that's not lining up this spring, so we're not seeing that. What this all means for Colorado, again, anybody's guess. We've got equal chances, which means there's not any certainty. I will say, though, that if you break this down month by month, the Climate Prediction Center has indicated that Northeast Colorado could be wetter in May. I don't know why that doesn't show up in the spring outlook, but for May, they're seeing a little bit of a signal that says, you know, we could have more moisture than normal in Northeast Colorado. And so I'm wondering if that's kind of an indication that we might have a big snow event on the way. Or maybe that's just fingers crossed, I don't know, but keep your eyes open for that for March. So I've mentioned the El Nino a few times, so we'll kind of talk more about what El Nino is doing right now. We are still in a moderate, strong El Nino event. You know, the Climate Prediction Center has said that there are important atmospheric indicators that align with this ongoing El Nino event, even if we haven't been particularly seeing it here. The chart on the left shows the likelihood as we go into the future 3-month time periods, will we be in an El Nino, which is the red bar, a La Nina, which are the blue bars, and neutral, which are the gray bars. And so that February, March, April time period, 100% likelihood it's still going to be an El Nino. As we go to that springtime period of March, April, May, the El Nino is still most likely, but you can see that it is weakening from that. And by the time we get to late spring, early summer, it's more likely that we will be in neutral conditions, which means we're not in an El Nino or a La Nina. And then the models are indicating that as we get into the late summer and into the fall, it's more likely that we're going to go into a La Nina again. So on the right is the graph that shows all of the individual models looking at those ocean temperatures in the tropical Pacific, where we watch for those El Nino, La Nina conditions. So El Nino would be a positive temperature anomaly. And that's where you see that we are. If you look at that January one, we're between 1.5 to 2 degrees Celsius positive anomaly, which is definitely in that strong El Nino category. But as we go through the spring, you see that those temperature anomalies start coming down closer to the 0 line as we get into the summer. And that's where we're talking about neutral conditions being kind of between positive 0.5 degree and negative 0.5 degree. And then as you get into the colder temperatures, which all the models are trending towards by fall, once you hit less than negative 0.5 degrees Celsius, now you're in those colder temperatures that indicate La Nina. So we are still in the El Nino, and it's going to be weakening, but it will stay through the spring. So what does that mean for our spring? This is taken out of our climate change in Colorado report, where we just looked at the relationship between precipitation around the state and El Nino, La Nina. So the only place you see blue is in the winter and the northern and central mountains, where La Nina tends to be wetter. All the other maps have red somewhere on them, and I want you to focus in on the upper right map, which is the March, April, May time period. And those reds indicate areas that tend to be wetter during an El Nino. So the west slope, the northern and central mountains, the Front Range, down into the San Luis Valley, the Sangre de Cristos, these are areas that in the March, April, May time period are more likely to be wet than dry. Obviously, again, that's not perfect, but we can hope that that pans out. This is a different way of looking at it. This is from the NOAA offices in Boulder. Look at the risk of extremes during an El Nino or La Nina. So in this case, I'm looking at what is the risk of a wet or dry extreme in the spring during an El Nino. So areas that are yellow, orange, and red tend to have an increased risk of dry extremes. Those would be areas I would think are more likely for drought development. Areas in green are areas that tend to have an increased risk of wet extremes during the spring for an El Nino. And so most of our state, particularly the southern portion of the state, tends to have that increased risk of wet extremes and also a decreased risk of dry extremes for the spring. So we can take this information and say, you know, are we going to see flooding? Not necessarily. But I like to take this information and say, it means to me that there will be a lower likelihood of drought development. And hopefully that will be the case this spring. On climate.gov, they've looked at the different El Nino winters and how much snow accumulates around the country compared to all winters. So the top map is for the strong El Ninos and the bottom map is for all El Ninos. But when you take those El Nino winters and compare them to all winters, how much snow do we get? And so areas of blue indicate where we typically get more snow during an El Nino event. And then the brown is areas where we typically get less snow during an El Nino event. Now, again, we can see this hasn't perfectly lined up with what we've seen for the winter so far. But for me, I like to take it and say, I would expect going into spring that we would have more snow continuation over the southern mountains and eastern plains. And if any area was more likely to miss out, it would be the northern mountains. So key takeaways to go over, water year 2024 has thus far been very mild with above average temperatures. Thanks to some recent atmospheric rivers in January and February, that's really helped boost our moisture and improve drought. As Brian mentioned earlier, we can't really ignore that early season dryness and those drier soils. That's going to be one of the indicators that drives what happens with our spring runoff. And so, like he said, it would be good to have above average precipitation and snow to kind of make up those early season deficits and dryness. We do look to be wrapping up February dry and mild, but the hope is that for some areas of the state, March is going to bring some more precipitation activity. With the El Nino, we haven't really been following that expected El Nino pattern this winter, but the El Nino will still go into the spring. So we still kind of want to look to that for guidance. We do have uncertainty as to what the temperature signal is going to be into the spring, but using that El Nino as guidance, we can hope that we're going to get some more moisture in the spring, particularly for the Eastern Plains and Southern Mountains. If you're going to hedge your bets on something, I would hedge my bets on having less likely drought development during the El Nino spring. The El Nino, though, is going to quickly weaken as we get into the summer. And stay tuned for fall, because it looks more likely that we'll go back into a La Nina, which has really been the dominant index for a lot of the 21st century so far. So that's kind of where we are now and where we're going. And that's all I've got for you.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Becky. If anybody has any questions, feel free to ask. Cool. All right. Well, looks like nobody has questions for you. So thanks, Becky, again. Like I mentioned at the top of the meeting, I wanted to try something out and have water providers, water managers, municipalities put their updates in chat. So thanks, Jordan, for doing that. But if anybody wants to share them or just come off mute and share them, that would be great as well. And we can do that now. Otherwise, you can put them in the chat as well.
Emily, if Becky's still on, I do have a question for Becky.
Yeah,
I'm still here.
Becky, with regards to El Nino and La Nina, is there any correlation to temperature extremes? Talking to my friends with the orchards on the West Slope, they're so concerned because, early bloom caused by these early warming temperatures is a really challenge for them. Is there any correlation to that?
Yeah, so the challenge with the looking at the relationship between temperature and El Nino, La Nina is that signal's been kind of washed out by the climate change signal, which is showing more warming. But I'm gonna look at the climate risks app real quick and see. I'm just going here real quick to the temperature one for March, April, May. And what it does show is that there's an increased risk for warm extremes in the Pacific Northwest. And so depending on where you are in Northwest Colorado, there may be some indicator, but closer to Colorado, particularly on the southern side of Colorado, is actually the increased risk of cold extremes. And so I would say we don't have much in the way of strong indicators for temperature and El Nino for Colorado. But if I was to worry about something, it would actually be like those late spring snows and cold snaps where, you know, you have to worry about, you know, your vulnerable calves and getting those in and protected from the cold extremes. So risk from warm extremes is going to be more because of our warming climate rather than the El Nino.
Thanks.
Yep.
Thanks for the question, Robert. And thanks, John, for putting your update in the chat. I will just pause one more time if anybody wants to come off mute to provide an update or have a question. Awesome. Thanks, Katie, for putting your update in the chat as well. All right. Well, hearing nothing, thanks everybody for tuning in for the February WCMC meeting. We will see you next month on March 19th. So have a great day, everyone. Bye.
Thanks, Emily.